Good morning, everybody, and welcome to the first of IMAP's InvestTech conference sessions for 2023. It's a pleasure for us to host these for you because it seems to me they address such an important topic of the role of technology in sustaining the 20-year advice relationship. We're going to be joined throughout the week by Fraser Jack, our MC for the week. And I'd invite Fraser to join us now.
Thank you, Toby. Thanks for having me.
No, it's great, Fraser. And I can't think of anybody who'd be better equipped to host this week's sessions talking about technology. Before we kick into it, of course, look, a thank you to those organisations who are contributing to this week's sessions. And Fraser, what are you looking to get out of this week's, or to highlight in this week's sessions?
Oh, goodness me, Toby, every session has got some great points to it. We've managed to have a good chat about what's behind a 20-year relationship and hand chose some speakers that can bring some amazing insights towards planning and practices. So I'm really looking forward to the whole week.
In a moment, we'll go through the week's sessions. But before I do that, just a little about the events that IMAP will be holding through the first half of this year. Most importantly for us, of course, the Portfolio Management Conference in March. This is a time of peculiar uncertainty in investment markets. And in Sydney, we'll be looking at how that plays out in individual asset classes, and in Melbourne, we'll be looking at the portfolio management, asset allocation implications of the investment markets we find ourselves in now. And then in May, we'll be doing a kind of half-year review, if you like, a little early half-year review in a webinar series hosted by Robert Talibsky of Activists called "So How's It Going So Far?"
Yeah, Toby, just on that conference, if you want to go back a slide, just on that conference, you want to talk a little bit about how people can get tickets to that?
Yes, sure. Thanks, Fraser. Yes, look, we'll be sending on all of the attendees for InvestTech an opportunity to join the Sydney or Melbourne conferences as our guests, and so we look forward to you joining us. Live conferences, of course, are an easier way to become directly engaged, to ask questions of the presenters. And we've lined up 15 or 20 presenters in each city who really do bring a depth of expertise.
Yeah, not only that, I know that a lot goes on behind the scenes with when you get into a whole lot of planners in the room together. There's a lot of conversations that take place off the main stage that are certainly helpful for most practices.
Yeah, thanks. So here are the week's sessions for.
That's right. We've got a lot of people coming at you every single day. So today we're going to have Andrew Inwood speak to you in a minute around the 20-year advice relationship. And this agenda was really put together around the concept of, financial advice relationships are long-term relationships, and technology, of course, has come along leaps and bounds in the last sort of 10, 15 years. And we're expecting that to make some major changes as we go forward. So a lot of the sessions today or this week are all around that concept of what can technology bring to a 20-year advice relationship. And there's plenty of different things it can bring. There's plenty of things to look out for, to take note of. Of course, Andrew's coming up today. Tomorrow we have Jackie Henderson presenting, talking about goals. We've got Delivering on the Promise with Eric Rocks. Wednesday at the same time, we'll have myself and Paul Moran speaking. Thursday, we've got Nathan Fradley and Martin Morris coming along to chat with you. And of course, on Friday, we've got Dr. Michael Colo, who's going to be talking about all things Chat GPT, which I'm really looking forward to. So a huge week of humans coming up on your screen to talk to you about technology, which is going to be amazing. And I'm really looking forward to the whole week. So stay tuned, log in this time every day, and you'll be able to get some great content.
And just before I hand over completely to Fraser, I wanted to mention that some of you may have had some difficulty registering for this conference. And that's partly because over the last week or so, the site's been under attack, a distributed service attack from North Korea. And so Fraser will be talking on Wednesday about a broader range of issues about cybersecurity. But I can tell you that no organisation is immune. Our experience of the last week or so has been evidence of that. So
Absolutely.
Fraser, thanks very much for
that's all right. Yeah,
this week.
Financial services, I think, are 300 times more likely to be targeted. So definitely got a target on our back. During the presentation today, if you do have any questions, please pop them in the Q&A box. We will be trying to get to all those questions. The presenters will be able to see them at the end, and we're hoping we can spark some conversation based on your feedback, your questions that you have along the way. So please pop those in as we go. Just a reminder too that this session is being recorded, so it will be sent out to those people that have registered the recording. There is CPD available along with this as well. The FPA are going to be presenting some CPD certificates, or you'll be presented with some CPD certificates that the FPA are I don't know what evaluating, I guess is the word. And so yeah, keep your browsers open, stay tuned right to the end, and we'll be able to send out some CPD. Toby? No. Yep.
As we handle the CPD ourselves, but those in association with the FPA, but those points are sent session by session. Yeah.
Excellent. So tune into each session along the week to get your CPD points. Andrew, I'm going to ask you to join me now. Andrew is one of the busiest human beings I've ever met. He's whenever you're trying to get hold of him, he's all around the world. He's researching, he's reading papers, he's doing all sorts of things. He's the global CEO, of course, of Coredata, and I don't think that he needs any introduction to this audience. If you haven't seen Andrew, I don't know where you've been. Andrew, welcome. Thank you for joining me.
Thank you for having me, and I'm always embarrassed by those kinds of introductions, but I'm delighted to be here, and everything you've said and more is true of what's happening in the world. And yeah, we've got a number of databases globally which are persistently under attack, which of course means we're just spending more and more money and employing more and more people to make sure that they're safe, maintained, and well harbored. So it's an increasing challenge.
Absolutely. Data is one of those things, and storing data is another one, and I'm sure you store a lot of it. But I'm going to hand it over to you to have a chat with everybody about the 20-year advice relationship and all the new pieces of research that you've done and read and seen in the space.
Thank you so much. Let me go to the presentation. I'm sorry, there's just going to be a little bit of jumping around here. I just made some changes just while we were talking, as always is the way.
So every time I've spoken to you, you're making changes to your presentation up to the last second.
Well, I mean, I finished it last week a little bit early when I was sitting in Boston. I had a Sunday in Boston, and I spent probably 3 or 4 hours writing it. And then I came back on, I got COVID, so I was kind of out of action for a few days. And on Sunday, I was back to my normal self and read a couple of academic papers, and then thought, right, now I've got to rewrite my speech because I've just learned some new things about what's going on. The front end of all this thinking, of course, is being done by academia. And I like to think that Coredata is involved in it. We've got 2 academic hookups at the moment, one with the UC Berkeley in the USA, and one with some guys in Cambridge, where we're sponsoring some research into this space because it's particularly interesting in the way in which this is behaving. So we've got one piece on trust, which we're researching and funding some research, and another one on risk. And eventually, I hope they're going to become academic papers and white papers for us as well. But your point is really well made, Fraser. I mean, we've got quite a lot of research on this, and I think everyone in the market knows that the relationship between an advisor and the investor degrades at a fixed rate. And at the moment, that's kind of at 36 months, but it's likely to go faster than that in the future. And that means that the halo effect of advice, the value which is constructed in the advice, and there's a lot of value in it, tends to last about 3 years before it has to be refreshed. But I want to get beyond that today and talk about some other big things. Those of you who don't know Coredata, we're a small international research firm, really interested in consumer behavior and the way in which those things work. And we've been doing it for the for the past 20 years. We've got operations in Sydney, in Perth, and Melbourne now, in Manila, in London, and in Boston. And for the past couple of years, we haven't told anyone about it, but we've had a digital office in San Francisco because that's where most of the good thinking is being done. And one of the reasons we've kept that off the radar and kept on the down low is that we don't want the world thinking about it or paying attention to us or what we're doing as we build the tools and the things that we're working on. And they'll pop out sometime next year. We consist of a few different businesses, and the bit which I think is interesting is not just the Coredata research business, which is interesting, but the three big databases that we have. The Anubis databases, which is high net worth individuals and asset decision makers globally. That's Australia, Asia, it's globally, it's every country. Athena, which is every question we've ever asked for the past 20 years, and Hunter and Bly, which is mass affluent and high net worth consumers. And it's important to understand that because we're kind of taking information from them persistently and obviously. We're kind of miffed that GPT-3 is now known and understood by everyone because we've been using it for the past few years, and the beta version is using it to sort of empower our databases and drive them forward. And now that's going to make life just a little bit more complicated, but that's okay. That's the way technology works. So I want to do a couple of things today. One is I want to take the 20-year view, and of course technology is critically important to that. Then I'm going to take the bit which technology can't really change, which is trust at the center of each relationship. Trust is very rarely between humans and technology brands. There's some evidence of that, but not a lot of strong evidence. Then there's technology and intimacy. Intimacy has been solved by a lot of brands through technology, but not yet financial services, which is kind of interesting. And then the final thing, which is brand new every 7 years. This is the wave of human relationships in terms of which relationship sets. A lot of evidence around this, and trying to understand that becomes really important. But I want to go pretty quickly because I know that everyone's busy and I don't want to waste anyone's time. So the first part of this is the 20-year view. And the common way that people play with the 20-year view is they play with a thing called time dilation, where they start to help people understand how quickly time changes and the perspective of change. Here you can see three pictures: the Great Pyramid of Giza, a particularly wonderful portrait of Cleopatra by William Wilberforce, who was in the pre-Raphaelite period in the sort of late 1880s in England, and Neil Armstrong walking on the moon. The great challenge with this is that everyone thinks that these things exist very, very far apart. And the reality is that they do, but the bit that exists very, very far apart is the pyramids of Giza were built 2570 BC, Cleopatra died in 30 BC, and Armstrong walked on the moon in 1969. In fact, I can remember being sent home from school to watch it on the television, which lets you know how old I am. So Cleopatra is millennia closer to walking on the moon than she is to the pyramids of Giza. The issue with that is that we very rarely consider what's actually going to be achieved in a short period of time. In the next 20 years, I think there's going to be some significant accelerations. When I was given this brief, I rang people all over, or emailed, didn't ring them, I rang some people all over the world and asked them what they thought was going to be a big deal in the next 20 years. And I got a big, long list of what's going on, but I chose three which are really going to affect our industry significantly. Two of these are going to be super, super important, and one of these is going to be somewhat important. The first one, which is going to be super, super important, and I've been on the board of a med tech company and a medical charity for about 6 years now. So I've kind of known this is coming, that in the next 20 years, we'll be choosing how we die. We're so far advanced in a number of medical technologies that most cancers will be solvable. Most destruction of what's called the smooth muscle wall in the heart will be solvable, and quite a few other things will be solvable. So we're going to have to choose how people die. So the generation has already been born that will be living well past what we think is a normal lifestyle. That's going to affect assets and funds absolutely fundamentally. The next thing is that, and this is a kind of contentious issue, and you have to take it up with the academics and not me, that there is no real way that renewables as such get rid of fossil fuels. That the hydrogen solar partnership is what everyone's really backing on, which is using power in the sunlight to split hydrogen out of available sources to be compressed to actually do everything. Hydrogen is a lovely fuel. You burn it, you make water, so and oxygen, so it's not a terrible outcome. It's energy expensive to make, so using solar to do it's kind of the way we should forward. And a lot of big manufacturing industries all around the world aren't going solar at all. They're simply waiting for hydrogen to come on stream, and that's already working. The first hydrogen-powered cars are important. And the third thing, which is going to be critical to our industry in particular, is the rise of Homo silica. For anyone that's interested, I'm going to send Toby a copy of the white paper, which I stole that name from. It's an academic white paper out of America, and make it freely available to you. The relationship between humans and computer-aided information and computer-aided memory is accelerating incredibly quickly. There's a lot of already successful businesses working on that brain-computer interface, and at the moment it's mostly working to control hands and limbs and bowels and hearts and those types of things, but it's not far away from actually being involved in decision-making. That's all going to be happening in the next 20 years. So the way in which people come to the industry is going to change fundamentally. Energy is going to be replaced, which is going to be great because that drives economies forwards. How people live and survive is going to be lasting much longer, which is not necessarily going to be great, because my sense is that we don't have the economics for very particularly long-lived people yet, and that working that out is going to be hard. And the way in which people make decisions will be fundamentally changed by the rise of Homo silica. And you can see that coming already with the things like ChatGPT and GPT-3, which are a thing called a large language model. They're not nuanced or intelligent yet, but they can't be far from it. And the top end of it is already mimicking that in some ways. So what's really important about this is that the trust is at the center of every relationship. Right now, trust has become significantly more important than it's ever been in the past. But to be perfectly frank, we seem to be in a post-trust world. These are the people that I was thinking about when I was thinking about the post-trust world. And some of these guys are unbelievable. Trump was a relatively successful president, whether you like him or not, certainly economically successful and relatively successful in foreign affairs, was particularly unpopular, but he was absolutely post-trust in so many ways, and so post-truth in so many ways that it's not even relevant. You all know who Elizabeth Holmes is, and the Theranos fraud, an absolute fraud from start to finish. It raised billions, sucked in everyone from Buffett's offsider to Bill Gates so I'm struggling for my words. So it's sucked in for everyone from let me start again. Sucked in an enormous number of Australian and American high-profile people who you think would know better, from Murdoch to Warren Buffett. Charlie Jarvis is the most recent one. She just recently defrauded Forbes by pretending she had 11 million email addresses of students, which he never had, and got a multi-billion-dollar valuation. Sam Bankman-Fried, he was the crypto guy. He's the person who defrauded everyone and appears to have spent the money on himself, but may escape prosecution because as a startup, he didn't guarantee what he was working on. Melissa Caddick, I think everyone knows, and the fraud that she perpetrated on the marketplace. Xenothemis is the oldest example of fraud. He's the guy who got caught with the axe while trying to sink his boat in Greece after insuring it. But my favorite of the moment is Mr. Santos from America. He's run for Congress, he's been successfully elected to Congress in New Jersey, and lied about everything on his resume. And turns out he's nothing who he said he was. He didn't go to the schools he went to, and yet he's still in power, and his own party is refusing to throw him out because it's going to cause an election. So all of a sudden, the way that trust works and truth works is starting to become incredibly important. So that means that brands are becoming really important, and no more important than the individuals inside the relationship. This really plays into the hands of those people who are building big advice practices, because as they build out their trust networks, they can scale. And as they build out the repeated trusting and trusted behavior, they can scale as well. So in ways which others can't. There are other big brands that are out there right now, which are quite well trusted, which are going to come under siege, weirdly, from a government which has empowered them. But they're going to start making decisions which are going to ask all sorts of questions of those networks and shapes, which is going to be quite important. Trust is really ancient. It's easy to measure and easy to see, and no more clear than the difference between Homo sapiens Neanderthalis and Homo sapiens sapiens. If you know anything of your anthropology, you know that Homo sapiens Neanderthalis, the Neanderthal man, and Homo sapiens, which is us, coexisted for a long time. If you know more about your anthropology, you know that they're bigger than us, stronger than us, faster than us, more vicious than us, yet we outcompeted them on every level. And the reason that it appears that we outcompete them is that we can store up behavior between each other. In essence, that's what trust is. It's our ability to store up behavior and pay it back. So the Neanderthals weren't able to do that because they missed part of the biology which does that. Trust is stored and identifiable in part of, this is a ventral view of the brain, is in a place, in a thing called the caudate nucleus, which lives just behind the pituitary gland in your brain. It's about the size of an almond. And every time, sorry, on top of it, so every time that trusting behavior is triggered inside the brain, the caudate nucleus lights up like a Ferris wheel. So we store it chemically, and people are understanding more and more and more about how it works and what the trusting hormone is. The trusting hormone was first identified by this guy. It's a guy called Professor Paul Zak, and it's the hormone that you see on your right, which is oxytocin. Here's something that's really interesting, right? The trusting hormone is the same hormone that fires up when we have love. It's the same hormone that we have pleasure. It's hardwired in us to seek trust. And the bet's really clear. The more that you trust people, because it is the way to act most of the time, the better off you're going to be. The more that you can build a trusted network, the better off that you're going to be. And how you build that trust is fundamentally understood and well and easy to articulate. Here's something that we track every year, every January at Coredata, which is looking at the trust levels of what's going on. I won't go too deeply into how we construct the trust levels, but it's pretty well understood, and it's a pretty well-respected, well understood sort of methodology for building trust. And this is where financial planners sit. And you can see pretty quickly that a financial planner on its trust score between 0 and 10 is trusted at 5.0 level. To be honest, it's come down and is on its way slowly back up post the Royal Commission. And you can see where it fits. What's interesting about this is it's one decile away from accountants, which are trusted at 6, but everybody above that is in a service role. Paramedics, nurses, pharmacists, specialists, practitioners, teachers, police, psychologists, and then we get into professionals. The people who are in the service roles, who are in the high trust profession, are often meeting people at crisis. Where you need longitudinal relationships, then trust starts to suffer very quickly. And you can see here that the relationship between lawyers and financial planners isn't particularly significant, and not particularly significant between actuaries and financial planners. It starts to fall away very quickly. One of the things which is always really amusing to me is that we have politicians running reviews of the financial planning system when the trust of politicians is incredibly low at 3.5. And they're basically reviewing a more trusted profession, which is interesting. And the worst, of course, of all, and I hate to say this, is the insurance company executives. I tend to like insurance company executives, but you can see what the public thinks of them, and that's a pretty meaningful thing. What's interesting about this, as I said, is that we have a really well understood way of understanding how trust works. And this is a model built by a man called David McNeil in the 1970s, and has been run and examined ever since. And it's stacked up of 4 powerful integers: competence, benevolence, integrity, and predictability. The most powerful of these is benevolence. And benevolence isn't what you mean of giving, but it's how aligned are our beliefs. So it's really important to understand that having aligned beliefs is absolutely critical and important in what people are doing and the way in which they're thinking. So making sure that you work on that. When you stack this up, right, when you understand what people are working on and what they're doing. So if you start thinking about and say, well, they're interested in drivers, right? And they're giving us rational trust and emotional trust, and they're talking about our behaviors and our anticipation of engagement. And we can understand those things pretty clearly and pretty openly. Two of the ones that are really in our control, which are benevolence, which how aligned are our beliefs, and closeness. You can see here what's really interesting to this is that we go through each quarter and understanding it, is that they're actually pretty weak. In fact, they're the weakest numbers in the trust integers for financial planners in Australia, but they're the ones most in our control. People believe that the industry is competent, they believe it's consistent, they believe it's absolutely authentic, but are they aligned and are they close? No. So I would put it to us that's something that we can actually impact and through communication start to change and start to lift our trust figures fundamentally. And if we do, then we'll start to accelerate past actuaries, accountants, and lawyers, and something we ought to be focusing on. The next part of the presentation is about how technology has solved intimacy everywhere but financial services. Well, one of the things that so in Boston in the UK, I visited a lot of people who are at the kind of cutting edge of the work which is being done in financial planning and making sure that people are in that space. And one of the things I focused in is what's the software looking like? What does the relationship look like? And almost everyone I was speaking to was working on the intimacy piece, which goes back exactly to what I was just talking about, getting closer to people to be able to provide benevolence much more fundamentally than they can now, so that they're solving at scale the problem of building those trusted networks by using technology and pushing into that space. In a lot of places, that's really been solved in the online space in terms of meeting people. Where did you meet people? The latest data I could get at short notice was 2017 data. There's 40% of people have met online now. It's about 2 in 5 people are meeting online. That's of all couples. If you split that between single-sex couples and heterosexual couples, single-sex couples, it's 3 times as high. Sorry, it can't be 3 times as high, twice as high. It's in the 80% range where people are meeting online. So it's really interesting to me that the humans are starting to solve that much faster than other people. And the big losers in this are pretty obvious as well. And the big loser really is meeting through friends. So frequency is solving this in a way. We're yet to do that in financial services. People are still blundering into the tools or being recommended the tools. There's no outreach, there's no matching, those types of things aren't happening yet. But again, that can't be far away. Where technology is working in financial services is pretty clear. In January 2023, I worked with some guys in the US and the UK to map all the businesses that were in fintech. And we kind of do this every year. It's up. A year ago in 2021, there was about 1,100 businesses. Now there's 1,379 businesses in fintech, which are looking at some way to get into that space to sort of to compress the relationship between people and finance. And people are moving fast in this space. There's a couple of reasons for that. One is for the past 5 years, there's been a lot of capital rushing around. So that's allowed people to work into that space really quickly. And it's the complexity of their technology has also been removed. So more and more people are able to move into that space and to get more and more thin slices of the pie. Who's going to win? I don't know. We're in the early part of this cycle, so there's going to be a lot of failures, but there is going to be a number of winners, and it's worth trying to understand who they are and who's going to win in that space. The really interesting thing about this is that we looked at the who's in the GPT-3 space, which is the large language model that we talked about, and there's 611 that we could find that were significant. And that number is changing all the time. I've recently heard of a couple that have closed because too many people are getting to the space and they can't make it work. What's more interesting into that, and to me, is how people are investing in it. Microsoft have come out very loudly last week and said they're going to invest $10 billion into that. And I'm using their first GPT-3 tool on my teams now. It's a very nice little piece of kit. Amazon said they're going to invest 5.5 billion, but they're going text, they're going voice to text. So they really want to be in that voice space, not just in the large language model space. Google said they're investing US 2.5, but they're using their DeepMind to do it. So they're counting that money as well. So they're repurposing money inside DeepMind. When I asked my friend at Google how much they're spending on that, he wouldn't tell me. He doesn't have to tell me. And even little Coredata, the little guys from downtown Mossman in Sydney, we're investing $1.5 million a year into this technology to empower our databases and to build the tools that we want and to deliver what we want. And that's going to lead to a lot of trial and error and failure, but I would hope, given it's my money, it's going to lead to some sort of leaping forward in terms of understanding the market and the way in which the market behaves and giving our customers some significant advantages. The large language model is here to stay, and it's going to change the relationship in the way in which it's important. Now, we asked advisors a little while ago, people like you guys who are listening to the room, what's driving decision-making and how you're changing particularly platforms and what's going on. And we're looking at the drivers, and we know that the industry isn't created equal. That's a kind of hobgoblin that the regulator works with all the time, which kind of drives me slightly bonkers. And we break it up into kind of other models, and we look at micro, small, medium, and large, and look at the behaviors there. And you can see very clearly the 2 big things, or the 3 big things, which are driving what's going on: advisor technology, compliance support, and technical services. All of those are tech pushes. So if you take the top 3 things, they're all about the technology and how the technology actually drives the business forward. And that's how the people who are the interface between the asset, which is in most cases is the fund, and the systems and the processes and the skills, and the consumer, it's all about advisor technology. A completely separate piece of research, we were looking at do advisors expect growth this year? And the answer is yes. And a completely separate piece of research we did, we looked at the cost of providing advice. It was a piece of work we did for the FPA, and you can need to talk to them about getting your hands on that. But the costs and where the costs were growing was really in the compliance and the technology side as people built the new systems to enable their businesses to be future ready. The effort and the energy which is being expended in this space is fundamental. Now, there's some people on this call who know a bunch more about this than me. There's even some people who have sponsored this, like Advisor Intelligence, who are kind of leading that charge. But they know as well as you know how much effort and energy it takes to actually build those systems, those practices, and get them to its scale to be right. It's going to take a little bit more time yet, I think, but when that moves, the mill, as William Shakespeare said, grinds slow, but it grinds exceeding keen. Every industry where those things have worked, it's taken time, but the uplift has been absolutely extraordinary to allow these things to be built at scale. And I think that time is coming, certainly in the next 20 years, and making sure that you are ready for it is something that you have to be focused on and something you have to be invested in. When we looked at, is it actually lightening the load? Is it as yet making life easier for people and businesses? The answer is no. The answer is that people are still paying more. Micro and small aren't as invested, but medium and large are actually invested in these systems and pushing effort and money into these systems. So you can see the cost that's pushing into them. But my belief is that's going to change, and it's going to change fundamentally to allow it to scale. I think it's really important that it does get to scale because, as you and I know, the demographic push and advice in Australia for the next 20 years is going to be absolutely significant. One of the things that I didn't want to talk about too much today, but it's worth mentioning, is that the youngest baby boomer turns 58 this year in Australia, and they're going to live a long time. So their need for advice and to navigate the complexity of the system is going to be fundamental and extraordinary. And there is no sign that the automated systems or the passive systems are replacing that. People are going to need advice, and we have many, many times more consumers than we have advisors who need advice. So thinking about how you fulfill that's going to be important, and technology is going to be a critical part of this. So what I wanted to do when Fraser and Toby asked me to do this a little while ago is I wanted to understand what the population thought. So I had one of my younger team members start to sort of map the population of what's going on. So I said, take the population, look at the investors, look at the behavior of those two, and understand how they're doing it and how technologically savvy they are. The interesting thing is that there are a lot of Australians who are pushing into this space, and the number of them is starting to rise and rise persistently. There's still about a third of Australians who can invest, who don't invest. So it's about 5 million. And that's a really chunky market. And of the people who are in the investable age group, there's a large number of people who are investing into it. The kind of interesting part about this is those people who are going to invest online, who are going to actually do it in electronically traded assets within the next 12 months is pretty high. It's 1.5 million. That's 100,000 a month. If that is to be true, let's say it's half right. So let's say it's 50,000 a month, which is a lot. And there's a chunk who will never invest online because they just don't do anything, or maybe they don't have the money to invest. This data is of people who do have the money to invest, but if they do, it doesn't mean they necessarily believe they do. The reality is the market for this is extraordinarily large and going to remain extraordinarily large. And the embracing of the technological, the hybrid relationship between technology and relationship is going to be critical. So making sure that you're doing both those things becomes super important. Okay, final part of this is the details of the delivery and what's driving that and what's going on. So the kind of metaphor for this is two things. One's the prairie vole, which is a small rodent-like mammal that lives in North America, and the other one is the Face of Despair, which is a painting by Vincent van Gogh, which was actually a copy of another guy's painting, but that's beside the point. It's certainly better than the other guy's painting. So the prairie vole is the only one of the very few monogamous mammals. They're unfortunately like nature's chicken McNugget. They're snack sized and all the predators in the area they live in, but they're one of a tiny, tiny, tiny number of mammals that mate for life. What I'm trying to say there is really clear is that humans aren't loyal. And if you're on a platform now, and if people are working with a platform, that they are only there through their motivations, which in the most part is the pain of change. My suspicion is in the next 20 years, the pain of change is going to go away. That changing platforms, changing how you sit on things, and changing how you hold assets and trade with people is going to start to become much less obvious to consumers than it is now. And the change for people who are the intermediary between assets and the marketplace will become much less painful too. Partly that's going to be through regulation. You can already see that regulation around the world as people say you can't force people to stay with you because that's not the way in which markets should work. We need to free up markets, and partly because the new entrants are going to make it much simpler. So humans are not loyal and the pain of change is going away. So that means that choice is going to be driven by features, by cost, and by service. And that's going to become really interesting. So the next 20 years are going to lead to a volatility in the way what platforms people are sitting on and how they're sitting into it. So a little while ago, we did a bunch of work for NetWealth, who are obviously pretty keenly interested in this size. And we wanted to start to have a look at people who are embracing this market and embracing what's going on and doing it. So we started to break the industry up into not all parts of the industry are equal. We've got InvestTech stars, moderate performers, underperformers, tech laggards, and InvestTech consumers, and starting to do them by size. You can see the size of the bubble shows the shape of the market and where they are in terms of success, in terms of tech and what's going on. And you can see that as they move up the tech score, they start to move up through the business success score. That's now become completely correlated. Now, everyone's starting to work that out. Apart from those people who are seeking to exit the industry, you can see a pretty smooth line starting to appear in the relationship between underperformers and tech stars. And as people work that out, they're going to become more and more interested in becoming tech stars. But the reality about this is what's driving relationship, and you can see what's going on. The people who are in the early market adopters and the early adopters, and it's about 60% of the market who are pushing themselves into that space or claim they're in that space, are doing it with a pretty venal attitude. They're doing it because they want to be in business and they want to drive the value of their business further and further forward. As you know, we're in the US and the UK, and one of the things which is ripping across the UK market is a spate of mergers in the financial advice industry. People are merging businesses, selling businesses particularly to American asset owners who are trying to buy into businesses or buy chunks of businesses to get in touch with the revenue stream. And those businesses which are further along the technology line are able to attract significantly higher multiples than those people who are laggards. So we're seeing 3 and 4 times commonly for businesses which were somewhat technically savvy, up to 6 times for those who are very technically organized and have taken the heat and the work out of the process. And people who aren't at all, still down at 1 time, as people are paying, well, I'm going to give you earnings, but I'm not going to make a bet on that because I can't actually scale this. So as you embrace tech and you embrace the ability to scale your business, the value of your business starts to rise fundamentally. So, and it pays off relatively quickly. One of the really interesting things that's happening in the UK is that the advice businesses are working really closely with the platforms to build those relationships, and the platforms are often helping people take part of it. It's almost a co-opted role, and you're seeing a little bit of here in Australia with ANZ, NGA, and a couple of other pieces of people as they're pushing into that space. Now, if you start to look at what the users actually look like and start to have a look at the separation between what's going on, the separation, the one which is most interesting to me is the EBITDA, which is in the middle of this in this chart right in the middle there. If you can have a look at the profitability the gap between the two, it's greater than 25%. The reality is those people who embrace technology are driving their EBITDA model numbers fundamentally, and the people who are behind it are still lagging. And as that grows, that's going to be more and more significant as they can achieve scale. I'm going to be interested in terms of how the intimacy number works. We're starting to measure that now. But the work that we've done just very recently in the UK with businesses that are tech stars there and their customers shows that they're using the same tools to drive intimacy with their clients. So they don't do the same measurement as we do in Australia. They use mostly NPS scores. The NPS scores are incredibly high, because they're using the same technology to punch up their communication, increase the frequency and the relevance and the intimacy of the communication, mostly with free tools, which is really interesting. If you want to know about that, you can email me some other time. So not all segments are equal. And one of the really interesting things that's interesting to me is that if you have a look at the tech stars and the active clients rather than the passive clients, you can see what's going on there. And this is from the 2020 InvestTech report. That number hasn't really changed in 2023. And you can see that InvestTech stars have really got big relationships with their clients. They're in touch with them more frequently. They've got a stronger relationship. which makes them much more impervious to any sort of criticism by regulators because they've got a very tight relationship, and that's driving up a couple of things. It's driving up the value of the relationship, the frequency of the relationship, and understanding what's going on. Now, if you're looking at why people are not doing it, and this is a really important thing to understand, is what's driving people to push into it. The reality is that it's really hard to choose. Cost is for everyone. It's that we don't have the time to understand. There's too many choices. It takes too long to implement. But then cost becomes a driver as well. Really understanding what's going on is the big issue. Look, at Coredata, we're not immune to that. We've gone down to a number of dead-end roads as we've put on pieces of technology, run it hard for 3 to 5 years, and abandoned it, and have had to leapfrog to the next technology. The important thing is to is to continue to push into that space as much and as effectively as you can to drive into it. Everybody understands the value. If you can see right at the bottom of that, and you invert the number out backwards and say that it's 5% of people say they don't see the value in the technology. The inversion of that, of course, is that 95% of people do see the value. So it's really important to understand that. Now, final push from me is trying to understand how this is going to work in the next 20 years and what's going to be really important. Humans are pattern-seeking animals. Partly that's hardwired in us because those people who recognize the pattern of a tiger first got to run away before they got eaten. And we try and seek patterns in everything that we're doing. For those of you who are economics bores like me, you can recognize everyone in this book. We've got Mr. Elliott, who's the Elliott wave theorist, says that the market works in 5 to 7 year waves. We've got Joseph Schumpeter, who everyone's talking about again now. So Schumpeter's coming up as a classical economist. He's from the Austrian school of economists, and he has Schumpeter's waves of creative destruction, which means that every 50 years or so, a new technology comes along and destroys everything else. And rebuilds production, and the whole world economy gets remade. So all the old paradigms are not particularly useful. So there's quite a lot of talk about Schumpeterian economics in academic circles at the moment. Of course, he was writing post-Second World War when Germany and Japan got to rebuild manufacturing, mostly because the Allies had bombed their manufacturing flat. And then we got Vasily Kondratiev, who's the Russian guy who wrote about Kondratiev waves, which are 55-year wave circles. He was at the Council of Monte Carlo when game theory was being introduced and pushed his ideas pretty hard then. But he's hard to believe in because he based his theories on the lunar cycles and the wheat harvest. The point is that we're constantly looking for patterns, and it's something which is hardwired inside of us. The really big pattern is going to be the frequency of contact, and it's happening in every industry, and it's going to happen in ours, and it's going to be the presence in the pocket. There are some really good examples of how the presence is the pocket is working now, even for some of the bigger platforms and the newer platforms, in the way in which it's working and when they're working out. And this is a model of how that works. Humans, not all humans, but a big chunk of humans, particularly those who are well educated and absolutely those who are wealthy, it's very highly correlated with wealth and big stores of money, are goal-setting animals. And when you work with those goal-setting animals, then you start to understand what's going on and what energizes behavior and what sustains behavior and what directs behavior. This is a piece of work by a man called Stephen Locke in 1996, and it's worth reading. And that's what's going to drive performance. There's that frequency of contact, which is going to drive the outcome of this. This is not a new algorithm in human behavior. Frequency of contact times value of contacts gives you a growth number. We've for a long time worked in an industry which has relied on kind of an obdurate indifference to close relationships from most of the customers to drive it forward to this kind of very passive relationship where indifference has driven the relationship. That's going away. Technology in the next 20 years is going to change that fundamentally. Already with my advisor in the UK, and it's a great example of how people are using the new technology to drive it. And I first noticed it, I think a year ago when Russia invaded Ukraine. I got an email from Philip saying, "Dear Andrew, Russia's invaded Ukraine. We think carbohydrate values are going to rise, oil values are going to rise, gas is going to become important, and airline stocks are going to falter. So we're going to change our..." They run an IMAP business and individually manage account portfolio to reflect that. And I read that. I was sitting in London. I thought that's a good idea. Because I was in London, I thought I'll ring him up. And I rang up Philip and said, "Hey, that's a good idea. I've got a little bit of extra money. I'm going to send it to you to put into that account." And he said, "Oh, I haven't even read it." which was really amusing to me and slightly illegal to be perfect. The system does that, and then it just attaches my name to it. And I've now recognized that, and I've had a bunch of different ones from him, where it's, saying that we've got a new prime minister, we think this is going to happen. There's the winter in Europe has been really mild, so we think that is going to happen. And it's all automated, and it sort of pushes into that space about the frequency of contact and the kind of value of the contact gives it. And the other really interesting thing about that is, for me, it's very intimate, because it's, dear Andrew, this is what we're doing and this is what's going on. And that's important to understand. If you look who's winning and why, there's a lot of data on the retail side, and we've got a huge amount of data on the retail side, and you can see what's driving what's going on and what's happening. So CommSec in the retail side has a massive position, and it's going to be hard to sell. It's got about 1/3 of the market, and then there's a bunch of people sort of sitting between 7 and 9%, which is really interesting. And then when you have a look at what's driving what's going on, you can see what's going. Cost is the really important thing, and then it's security, and then ease of use. So really important to understand that that's what's going on. And then the next part about it is the worst feature is no reward, no reward, no reward, which is really, really kind of interesting to understand. So you can kind of start to see a copy of the market. We've recently done a retail market analysis, which one of the younger guys did in our team, and that's sitting on our, I'm not quite sure what to do with it, research yet. And if you want a copy of it, just email me at Andrew@Coredata, or write to Toby, and I'll send you a copy so that you can have a look at what's going on in the space. Then we wanted to look what's happening in the different age groups and different understandings, so you can actually see what's going on. You can absolutely see what's going on in this space. The gender splits are quite significant, the difference between male and female. The age group splits are absolutely significant. So understanding where you sit, how you're operating, who you're talking to, and what's going on is really important. And the income splits are really, really significant too. And we only went up to $250,000, greater than $250,000. We mimicked the Australian main data bands as a way of thinking about that. So you can see what's absolutely happening in that space. I need to crunch on because I've only got 4 minutes. Better understanding is going to be what's really important. Familiarity and usage are going to be sort of super important in what's going on. So concept is everyone's familiar with it, and you can see what the usage is, and you can see very clearly what's happening in this space. There's a bunch of brands that I've never heard of, and they've got tiny bits of the market. How they behave and how they act is really going to be the important, but you can only see that one in 5 is absolutely not using anything. One of the things which is interesting to me, and I want to explore this even further, is that as people build relationships with the platform, they're using it more likely to start making decisions after reading it, and that's pushing friends and family out of the relationship. So this is the sort of slight indicator of the rise of trust in the platform. So as you work in this space and what you build, it's going to be really important that your platform is one of the ones that they're trusting and that they're moving towards as well at the same time. The other part of this is to have a look at where people think that AI is going to make a difference. And you can see what's happening in the space where people, where the younger people and the richer people are much more likely to rely on AI than everybody else. So when you start to think about that, in 20 years, those 29-year-olds are going to be the 59-year-olds, and the 59-year-olds are going to be the wealthy one. And let's say 60% of them are relying on AI to make decisions, and they're all going to be in that $150,000 or more space. So as that matures, the reliance on AI is going to accelerate. So making sure that you are participating in that space, and that's really part of your relationship with them as well as your personal relationship, is going to start to push your trust integers along. And then you can see where it's going in terms of looking at all those features as well. Are you likely to switch? The answer is broadly no with the people that we have in the market now with real money, and that's the people who are kind of 50-year-old. But yes, for the younger people, as that market matures, you're going to see that start to shift as well. There's a kind of bit that we don't know yet. It's partly like everybody under 30 is a socialist until they get real money. So maybe they won't start shifting once they get real money, but let's observe this and keep a very close eye on it in terms of the way in which things behave. Look, I'm going to finish up here and finish up on 2 things. One's a metaphor for the future, and the other one is what the people around the world told me were the critical things that they're working on. This is Logan Airport in Boston, and you can see it's really empty now. Used to be a terrible, terrible place to fly into for those of you who've flown into Boston, and now it's incredibly simple. There are no places to scan your passport, to go through the places, to go through the process. You walk up to the man at the passport desk now, and he says, "Hello, Andrew." They knew you were coming from the time that you filled in the ETSA. They now track you as you enter. He's got your photo on screen. He knows who you are, and it's kind of frightening. As I was standing there this time to go through it, I looked at this really big, muscular guy in an American police uniform and said to him, "Do you want my fingerprints?" Kind of, because that was the old method. He just looked at me and said, "We've got your fingerprints. Thanks, mate." And that was kind of interesting. While I was there, I was working with some tech teams, and I was lucky enough to be friends enough with someone who works at MI6, which is the UK Secret Service, to go and have a look at what they were doing. And he was showing me that they're beyond facial recognition. They're using a thing called gait recognition, how your body moves. Turns your body into a series of stick insects and observes how it moves. And it can start making a whole bunch of decisions about whether you're drunk, whether you're tired, whether it's you, whether you've got a hat on or a face mask, and it's now all irrelevant because they're tracking those sorts of things. As those things become mainstream, and they tend to be hidden inside security systems for 5 or 6 years and they come up to mainstream, they're going to be used to detect what's going on with our consumers. It's my belief that in the next 20 years that you are going to have a lot of information about the people on your database, and the way in which you can use it's going to be very interesting. So I think that here are the 5 things which are really going to be interesting and really important to understand. First is that there's going to be significantly greater intimacy, and that's going to save a lot of the trust figures that that are going on. And as those intimacy works on, that's going to start to give you a series of choices, and we're working in that space a lot. The second thing that's going to happen is that a lot of the work in running the platform is going to be removed. It's going to be modeled out. It's going to be automated, and it's going to be worked on. There's people who are sponsoring this in very presentation who are actually working on this as we speak. And that's in a lot of industries, that's a long further ahead than it is in financial services. It's mostly been held up by financial services, by people with vested interests, but those have been chipped away at. AI models and next most likely action and most rewarded action are going to be modeled out for you. So one of the things that people are working on in financial services all the time is they're watching their customers and using segmentation and behavioral analysis to work out what they're going to do next and how they're going to behave next and what they're actually going to do and how they're going to do it. And they're also now going to be working on what's called the next most rewarded action, the one which people is going to get the most pleasure from. It's really likely over the next 20 years that you're absolutely going to understand those, and you're going to be able to deliver service speed. And service speed, which is point 4, is going to be absolutely outrageous. As I talked about walking out of the, I fly economy because I'm cheap and I'm prepared to put up with the pain to Logan. But the fact that you walk out of it and you just literally stroll through customs now because your face is recognized, your gait is recognized, and they know who you are, and the guy says, "Hello, Andrew," it's going to be outrageous. Can you imagine the time in which you ring your bank and it recognizes you, pulls all the data together, and the person says, "Hello, Andrew," or if the AI says, "Hello, Andrew," or even the advisor does, or someone inside the business to allow it to scale. The next thing that's going to be really interesting is that as those skills really build out in belief and get more powerful, because one of the things that I was completely aware of when going to Boston and particularly in the UK is that they're very, very interested in the Australian market. So I think that the provider was probably going to come from anywhere now. That geography is going to be largely irrelevant. The intimacy that you have with your clients is never going to be replaced by someone who's working out of London or Boston or Mississippi or San Francisco, where a lot of this work is being done. So there's kind of 3 things to focus on to really make sure that you participate in the future of this. First is that you have to build your brand. Your personal brand becomes really, really important in this space. You have to choose who you are, which means building your point of separation. What is it that you do? And what is it that you do to maintain that intimacy? And then finally, partner where you can't compete. And with that, thank you very much for listening to me. And I'm going to hand back to Fraser Jack. Thank you, Fraser.
Thank you, Andrew. I'm going to get you to stay on because I've got a couple of great questions that have come through as we were chatting. Amazing presentation. Thank you, as always. I had a quick one come through earlier regarding the concept of building trusted relationships with human beings, obviously with the advisor, versus trying to build a trusted relationship with a brand, and whether the loyalty piece and the intimacy piece can be done, obviously with humans, but with the brand as well, with the practice.
So such an important piece of work, Fraser, and I'm actually deep in working on that right now, and I'm hoping that's going to spit out in the middle of the year. It's kind of more complex than you think, because the brand now is not just the design or the experience. It's actually the kind of digital brand. It's kind of homo silicus, which that point is making out to. So much of the interaction now is is dealing with people online. Prior to, and this is a pretty terrible example, like I have a advisor who I like dearly, and he's got a great website. I never bother with the website. I ring him up directly. I've got his mobile because I've known him for 20 years, and he answers the call, and we, talk about the footy, and then we get on to work and all those kind of things. That's going to be impossible to replicate. He could move to the moon. I'd follow him because I like him, and I've got 20 years experience. But building up a physical brand in that space is going to be important. With younger people, that website experience is super important. So thinking about that's going to be really important. So yeah, it's complex. I don't fully understand it yet, and I'm reluctant to answer it until I do, and I hope to have the answer in June, and I'm up to my neck in it as we speak.
Yeah, fair enough. We had a great question coming from Andrew, who talked about, and I'm happy to talk about this on Wednesday, but cybersecurity issues with regards to trust. Obviously, the media has been all over, the Optus and Medibank debacles, and that the idea around online and trust with existing clients and not wanting to work.
Yeah, that's so super important. And Fraser, I hesitate to speak about something you know a lot more about than me. We have to pass huge audits. We're just doing one now by. It's kind of teeth wrenching because it's being done by a Swiss firm, but the Swiss team around the world. So you have to build the big models of trust. And one of the things which amuses me endlessly is I assume that both Medibank and Optus were human error because the processes are written, right? And people jump over the processes, break the human error, and all the time someone's left the door open somewhere or done something really dumb. We check ours every week. I assume they check theirs daily, but making sure that that's not broken is going to become really important. There's a really interesting bit though. So everyone's aware that some advisors in Australia were hacked not so long ago because they had a thing called an edge server, which means they kept all their data on a server was on a PC in their office, which wasn't attached to the which was attached to the internet permanently, which is an outstandingly dumb thing to do. But 5 years ago, it was probably a really good idea. It was probably the best thinking in the world. And they thought they had a firewall, and that was the same thing. So mapping the trust fallout from that, it was tiny. People knew that people make mistakes, right? I haven't done it for Optus and Medibank, but I'm still a customer of Optus and Medibank, and my position hasn't really particularly changed. But with that particular advisor, I said, for free, I will map that for you because I want to understand. The trust fallout was really small. There was a small number of really indignant individuals, but everyone else said, I trust person X. I know that he's trying to do the right thing, and that was a mistake. And, and that if I lose money, he's going to remediate it, which is, I don't know if anyone lost money, but I know that he remediated. When I looked at what he did, it was kind of outstandingly dumb. But, the interesting part about what we do is that we work really hard to have none of our databases attached to the internet. I don't know how you get to them. You'd have to print them off and photocopy them, and only use the ones when we're sort of facing outwards. We sort of build a model, face it outwards, and bring it back. But it's hard, mate, because I know this site's been under attack, under what's called a distributed denial of service attack. We face 100 a week, and so I assume that everyone's facing at least as many as us because we're not loud. We don't make a big deal about ourselves, so and it's mostly coming from one country, which we dare not mention, but
Yeah, fair enough. Now, you mentioned the presence in the pocket and the frequency. I've always thought that this is very much around building trust online, is about being consistent and regularly showing up, because you can't just put your hand out and shake somebody's hand and show them that you're not a threat. So talk to us about the number. Is there a number you think where if somebody is, the presence in the pocket, the notifications, the ongoing, letting you know that they're there? Is there a number that advises?
It's no more than fortnightly. Fortnightly is about the maximum. Don't do it daily. There's a couple of tech startups you probably know as well as I do, and I'm not going to mention them, who are doing daily updates to people. It's driving people bonkers. Once a fortnight is enough. It's got to be at least every 30 days, If you're writing stuff yourself, or even if you're using ChatGPT to write it for you and doing a write through, then as much as you like. If it's personalized and done yourself, then it's absolutely as much as you like because it's about you. If it's just a punch with something to sell, some really interesting stuff going on, particularly the superannuation stuff at the moment. Have a look at Active Super Rewards, where people are getting discounts for what's going on. They've got a neat little tool, which is if you're an investor in Active Super and Active Super invests in a brand, you get a discount. and that's starting to behave quite interestingly. There's some challenging stuff, and I'm sure everyone here is aware of the Australian Super and the Qantas Flybuys things, but that frequency and reward piece is starting to become something which is trickling into the industry and is starting to become interesting. Look, for a lot of people who are investors, they're investing with a future bias, and understanding you're rewarding that future bias is incredibly important. So it is a challenging space, but the presence in the pocket piece, I think, is the bit which the really good European, and I assume Americans, although I haven't seen American funds managers, are doing by constantly rewarding you what they're doing, is starting to become really important. There's a challenging bit in this because there's a nuance piece where people are doing things like ethical investments and green investments, et cetera, where they're rewarding it. It's starting to become even more interesting. The individually managed account space is really, I think, an important part of the future of this industry, because it is a highly scalable piece of the industry, and it keeps being tested by regulators, and it keeps passing that test, because the best in the world are building model portfolios that you look and, yeah, that's a pretty sensible model portfolio and it costs X, which is a reasonable cost. I think in some ways this part of the industry could be the absolute savior of the industry, because it scales infinitely and you can manufacture it cheaply. And by using the communication skills that exist, you can manufacture intimacy pretty quickly as well. The bit that's challenging.
If I can interrupt, then of course the other thing which technology is doing is heading us towards mass customization, which is, this is the portfolio that, you know, Bob with $100,000 would buy, but your circumstance a little different. So we're getting the scale benefits, the mass customization benefits, but we're taking your circumstances into account. That's going to be the absolute, that's going to be the killer app, if you like.
Yeah, the guys I use in the UK, Toby, you're 100% right. I mean, I get an email once a month saying, hey, we've adjusted your portfolio because this is going on. And then 2 months later, they say, remember, we adjusted your portfolio. Here are the positive things that happened from that. So you get this kind of, it's called anchoring, because you go, shit, these guys are on it, right? These guys are absolutely, well, how much are they? 1.5%? Yeah, it's good value. Because, you know,
God, they're expensive in the UK. I always knew that.
They've got lovely offices.
Look,
Andrew, just before you go, mate, tell us how people can get hold of you if they need to continue conversations with you, and
I'm easy to find.
How and who you work with, people.
So I'm Andrew at coredata.com.au. Very easy to find if you want to work with me. I'm fascinated by the industry. If you've got a question or you want to talk or you know those things, I think Fraser, you and Toby are both part of the group that I ring up and say, hey, listen, have you thought about? And you're always good with your time. And I like to be good with my time. When it becomes a job, I'll say, hey, now this is a job, and we need to think about this and go from there. But look, you know, as I was talking about at the start of this, I'm investing two big pieces of change and understanding two things. One is how risk is changing. There's some work out of the UC Berkeley which says that risk is immutable, that risk in humans doesn't change. And I formed a relationship with the guy who wrote that paper and said, I don't think that's true. And so now we're doing a big experiment to figure out whether it's true or not. And the other one is the trust piece, which, you know, is the bit that I'm researching every year, because at the end of it, that's what's happening here. People are trusting you with their future. They're passing you their stored labor and investing that in you. Now, trust is a rewarded behavior inside every part of a relationship. People are better off to work in these trusting relationships. And if you want to read more about that and get that in a really accessible way, there's a wonderful book called Talking to Strangers by Malcolm Gladwell, which has a whole chapter on money and trust. And it's absolutely worth it. And if you don't want to listen to it, he did an interview with a guy called Joe Rogan, which sums it all up really quickly. So you don't need me to tell you about that. But we have to become incredibly good at it. And we have to be able to do it, because if we become good at it, then every bit of data I have says that people who enter into a trusted relationship with their financial advisor is emotionally and financially fundamentally better off. They retire earlier, they retire healthier, they have more holidays, they privately educate their children. There's all sorts of things which go on if you have an advice relationship. And the interesting bit about that is that's work which a year ago was sponsored by IWF, and I'm sure they'll share it with you if you want to. Everyone's got that data now. One of the things which is maybe a bit of a hair in the ointment of the government is they know that it's provable that advice matters and it makes a difference. So, you know, we have to be grown up about it. I mean, look, it's not to say that there aren't asses in the advice industry. They're evenly distributed across every industry, in surgeons and lawyers and doctors and accountants, et cetera, well. It can be damaging in advice, but a lot more people are made a lot richer than people who are punished in this industry.
Fantastic, Andrew. Thank you so much for coming along and generously speaking to us all today. Toby, as we move through these amazing presentations, we've got a great looking week ahead coming at this time. Every day this week, from Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday, we're going to have 2 people on Tuesday, 2 people on Wednesday, 2 people on Thursday, and Dr. Michael Collar is going to finish off on Friday. Thanks everybody for attending today. Really appreciate your time. Understand that you've probably got to get back to work and get some things done. Thank you so much, Toby. Anything else?
No, that's it. So thank you very much, Fraser. Thank you, Andrew, and I'm really looking forward to the next 4 sessions.
Thanks so much for having me, guys. It's always a pleasure.
Thanks.
Bye now.